Greetings and salutations. In today's video we'll look at how Roman plumbing made the empire possible, and hopefully we'll relearn history together. I don't know about you, but when I think of ancient Rome, images of emperors, gladiators, and chariots come to mind. What doesn't usually spring to mind is the toilet, but it was the relative abundance of flush toilets in the Roman Empire that enabled its spectacular rise to power. If the Romans had not been able to supply their cities with clean water and manage their waste, they wouldn't have been able to support huge populations, especially in their densely populated cities. And without those cities, the empire would not have functioned. So today we're going to learn just how the Romans solved these problems. So the story of Roman plumbing starts with the aqueduct. Aqueducts were constructed throughout Italy and into the bringing fresh drinking water from the many rivers, lakes, and aquariums located there. Most famous aqueduct still standing is the Pont du Gard in southern France, which is actually a combination of aqueduct, bridge, and townhouse, all in one. The engineering techniques used by the Romans to move water over great distances were so advanced that they were not surpassed until the modern age. They used gravity to move water through pipes that were often constructed above ground and sometimes below ground. The water was collected in a cistern within the city, usually located near the point of entry for the aqueduct. From there, the water was distributed through smaller pipes throughout the city. This infrastructure was maintained by the state and was free for citizens to use. But why does any of this matter? Water infrastructure is great and all, but I don't need to flush my coffee down the toilet in order to enjoy a nice cup of joe. The aqueduct's purpose wasn't only to supply drinking water to the citizens of Rome, it also supplied water to public toilets. Rome had public toilets. In fact, Rome had public toilets everywhere. The public bathroom situation in Rome was so well developed that it's actually the reason for the existence of the word latrine. Latrines are typically associated with military camps, but the Latin word for this type of bathroom was latrine, which originated in ancient Rome. Emperor Nero's Domus Aurea, or Golden House, as it was called, was one of the largest private residences ever built, even larger than the Palace of Versailles. But he built his palace on top of the Domus Transitoria, or place where one transfers, a common type of public bathroom found throughout the city of Rome. While the emperor may have overshadowed the public bathrooms that existed beneath him in other parts of the city, the latrines stood tall, literally. In some cases, they were enclosed buildings, often with multiple stories, while in others, they were simply a series of connected stone troughs along a wall. These public toilets were often located near taverns, bathhouses, markets, and other popular public spaces, as well as throughout taverns, bathhouses, and markets, because in ancient Rome, people ate, drank, socialized, and relieved themselves in the same places. If you've ever traveled to Greece or the Mediterranean, you know that public restrooms are few and far between. In fact, you might have experienced a situation where you needed to use a public restroom but couldn't find one. You then had two options. Option 1 was to find a restaurant, which in Greece is usually synonymous with public bathroom. Or, option 2, if you are outside of Athens, was to do your business in the street. The lack of public restrooms actually contributed to the spread of the Black Death in Europe during the Middle Ages. Fewer public bathrooms meant more people defecating in the streets and subsequently spreading the plague through their We can thank the Romans for helping us avoid a similar fate today. And speaking of fate, it was thanks to Rome's sophisticated wastewater management system that Julius Caesar was able to meet his on the Ides of March. The Senate meeting where he was assassinated was near a public bathroom. When the assassins fled the scene, they used the bathroom to wash up after killing Caesar. Rome's public toilets didn't just have running water, they had running sewage too. That's right, if you wanted to flush your business down the toilet, you could do that in ancient Rome. The urine was carried away through a separate set of pipes, the aqueducts, and was used for cleaning purposes. Urine was highly prized for its disinfectant qualities and was used throughout the empire for cleaning latrines. The urine was also used to clean clothes, floors, dishes, and pretty much anything else you can think of. Urine was probably also used to clean yourself in the public bathrooms, judging by the graffiti that covered the walls of many of them. The urine was collected in a number of ways. Sometimes it was simply caught in a container or vessel. In other cases, it flowed directly into a sewer. Sewers are often erroneously referred to as sewers, but the term sewer is actually used to describe the pipes that carry away the waste, whereas the term sewer refers to the structure above the pipes that houses them. The main sewer in Rome was called the Cloaca Maxima, and it's still in use today. It's no longer used to carry urine, however, nor does it handle human waste. Rather, It serves as Rome's storm drain, carrying away rainfall One interesting feature of the Cloaca Maxima was its manhole covers, which were circular. Circular manhole covers are still used today, but you don't often think about who invented them. There's a good chance that, whoever it was, would have been a Roman. Thanks, guys. One of the most popular attractions in Rome is the Pantheon. This former church is now a museum, and is home to the best preserved ancient Roman dome. But the Pantheon wasn't always a church. It was originally a temple to all the gods of the Roman Empire. It was constructed in the 2nd century AD by the Roman Emperor Hadrian, but was destroyed by earthquakes several times over the centuries. The last time it was rebuilt was in the 17th century when it was converted to a church. The Pantheon has a number of unique features, but perhaps the most impressive is the oculus, the circular opening in the center of the dome, which allows light to enter the interior. The oculus is also responsible for a number of interesting design decisions. However, because the oculus was directly above the altar had to be moved every year when the summer solstice occurred. This was necessary because the sunlight would pass directly through the oculus and illuminate the altar during this time of year. As you can imagine, lighting candles on your birthday cake becomes pretty difficult when you're staring directly into the sun. While the aqueduct and sewage systems were critical to the success of the Roman Empire, so was the road system. The Roman roads were so durable that many of them are still in use today. If you've ever driven through southern France or Italy, there's a good chance you've been on a Roman road. The Romans used a number of different materials to build their roads, including dirt, gravel, brick, and stone. The type of material used depended on the location and purpose of the road. For example, the roads that connected cities were usually paved with stone, while the roads that connected villages were usually made of dirt and gravel. The Romans also used a number of different techniques to build their roads. For example, they used a technique called opus cementitium to build roads that were particularly durable. Opus cementitium is a type of concrete that was invented by the Romans and was used to build roads, aqueducts, and other structures throughout the empire. The Romans also used a technique called a raised pavement, which involved building a road on top of a raised platform. This technique was used to build roads through marshy or swampy areas. As you can see, Roman engineering was quite advanced. The Romans were able to build roads that were so durable that they were able to withstand the weight of chariot wheels and the hooves of horses. In fact, the Romans were able to build roads that were so durable that many of them are still in use today. Toilets in ancient Rome came in a variety of styles to suit their users' needs. While there is no surviving footage of what they looked like, archaeologists have uncovered many remarkably preserved examples of these ancient bathroom fixtures. Archaeologists and classics professors from the universities describe them as surprisingly modern. And modern they are. Most Roman toilets consisted of a simple terracotta seat that sat above a hole in the floor. This seat would be connected to a network of underground sewers that carried away human waste from all around the city. What's so fascinating about these toilets is that they used the same basic design as modern toilets. In fact, you could probably plop down on one of these without even feeling out of place. But instead of a tank, the seat was connected to a vertical pipe by a siphon. When you flushed the toilet, you pulled a cord that opened a valve in the pipe. This allowed water from an aqueduct to rush through the pipe and whoosh out the bottom, flushing the bowl. Some toilets even had foot pedals instead of cords. A small price to pay for such a convenient piece of technology. It's important to note that these toilets weren't exactly private, especially the public ones. They were often built into walls with multiple stalls in a row, making them very much a communal bathroom experience. People shared these bathrooms throughout the empire, from common folk to the emperor himself. These public spaces likely saw quite a bit of action, offering us a glimpse into the daily lives of the people of ancient Rome. Unlike the movie Gladiator, where Russell Crowe's character Maximus is shown relieving himself while getting a massage, this was not the norm. Instead, most people relieved themselves on the street corner or in an outhouse, instead of in the privacy of their own homes. In taverns, patrons would use a raised platform with a terracotta pipe attached to it. In taverns, patrons would drink wine and beer served in a special type of cup called a cup. Sounds kinda fancy, right? Well, it gets fancier. These kylaxes often had elaborate mosaic designs, some even depicting scenes from mythology. One of the better preserved examples of these mosaic toilets can be found at the site of the Domus Transitoria, a series of imperial palaces used by emperors from the Flavian dynasty up until the Julio. Located just outside the Palatine Hill, this palace complex was constructed sometime in the late 1st century BC by the order of Emperor Augustus. But after a fire under the reign of Emperor Nero, it was rebuilt by his successor The palace consisted of several structures and courtyards with frescoed walls and mosaic floors. The reconstructed bathroom had 3 toilets in a row, decorated with blue and white mosaics of sea creatures swimming among coral. What's really impressive is that they even created mosaic designs for the spouts that distributed water throughout the room. And the room itself was well equipped with amenities. There were marble sinks on either end, with bronze mirrors propped against them. There was even a fountain in the center with a marble basin resting on top, suggesting that this area may have also been used for washing. The toilets themselves had a built-in foot pedal to flush. All things considered, this bathroom was fit for an emperor. But in addition to the luxurious mosaic work, other toilets had more subtle decorations. Some had simple geometric patterns or scenes from nature, such as laurel wreaths or grapes. Even the plumbing fixtures themselves were sometimes decorated with mosaic tiles. In fact, excavations in Pompeii revealed a house with an entire room dedicated to bathroom facility. It had 5 toilets along the walls and 2 marble basins in the center, each decorated with a different mosaic. Unfortunately, because of an earthquake, a wall collapsed onto the toilets, breaking them and covering them in plaster, which prevented them from being taken away. So we got a pretty good look at what they looked like. This particular home belonged to a wealthy man named Lucius Caesar. We know this because an inscription over the doorway read El Caecilius Jucundus, former mayor of Pompeii. Welcome home. He must have been quite proud of his digs. Not only did he have a well-decorated house, complete with indoor plumbing, his property was located right next to the gladiator barracks. Just another day in Pompeii. In another example of a wealthier person's bathroom, in the ruins of the Villa of Mysteries near Pompeii, archaeologists discovered yet another marvelously preserved toilet. This one had a marble base and was surrounded by frescoes, including one of a woman bathing. If you ask me, this bathroom was giving bath vibes. In fact, some toilets were installed directly into marble baths, allowing the user to bathe and use the toilet all in one go. But wait, there's more. Some toilets even had running water. That's right, the people of ancient Rome had heated toilets. The Emperor Nero's Golden House, also known as the Domus Aurea, is one of the most famous archaeological sites in Rome. Built between 64 and 68 AD, this sprawling residence was built on the Palatine Hill, after a fire devastated a large portion of Rome. Ironically, the emperor commissioned the project to be built on the land of his great-grandfather. The fire destroyed a large portion of the city, but it also provided an opportunity to redesign Rome's infrastructure, including adding new plumbing. And nowhere was this more evident than in Nero's Golden House. In the lavish bathroom, archaeologists discovered a toilet with a built-in pedestal that had hot and cold running water. No wonder the rich and powerful wanted these bad boys in their homes. They were convenient, hygienic, and quite frankly, comfortable. And, speaking of comfort, a stable environment is key to feeling comfortable. While the conveniences of the public bathrooms may have been lost on the average citizen, one thing that did not disappear was the toilet tax. The Emperor Nero introduced a tax that everyone had to pay when they wanted to use public bathrooms. However, according to Cassius Dio, a Roman senator and historian, this tax was quickly repealed. Due to popular discontent, the people complained that they were already paying taxes for the use of roads and bridges, and that having to pay to use a bathroom was too much. Maybe it's best that we don't revive the toilet tax anytime soon. While the majority of Roman toilets were simple affairs, some members of the elite had access to surprisingly modern conveniences, showing that the empire's greatest advantage was its infrastructure. Thanks to all these incredible discoveries, we can paint a vivid picture of the daily lives of the Romans, but there's still so much to learn. For example, archaeologists are unsure whether toilets were cleaned after use. They think attendants may have scrubbed the bowls with a sponge on a stick, but it's hard to say. Also, we don't know how often these toilets were actually used. They may have been reserved for important guests or perhaps left unused after the fall of the empire. You see, unlike most cities of the ancient world, Rome wasn't just a collection of buildings thrown together on a piece of land. Rather, it was a thoroughly planned city from day one, right down to its extravagant sewage system. In fact, the Romans' waste management system was so advanced for its time that even modern-day New York pales in comparison, and New York is one big toilet. The word lavatory comes from the Latin word lavatorium, which means a place for washing, and this is fitting because Roman toilets weren't your standard porcelain throne. Instead, they were elaborate fixtures with intricate mosaics on the walls, and sometimes even running water. In fact, some of them even had little shops built around them, which doubled as advertisements for local businesses. This is in stark contrast to the ancient world, where human waste was often just dumped into the streets. Not only was this disgusting, but it was also a major cause of disease and death. Even ancient Greek and Egyptian cities, which were generally much cleaner than other places at the time, still had problems with waste disposal. But Rome took a different approach. When Emperor Nero built his famous Domus Aurea, or Golden House, he also constructed an elaborate plumbing system to go along with it. Although most of his palace is now gone, many of these pipes can still be seen today, including the remains of a bathroom with running water. This was hardly an extravagant luxury, though, as similar bathrooms could be found all throughout Rome, from the palaces of the rich to the humblest of homes. But where did this revolutionary idea come from, and how did it spread so quickly? To answer this question, we have to travel back to the very origins of Rome itself. Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, are said to have established the city's earliest institutions, including its government and legal system. But they also created Rome's first sewer. According to legend, Romulus was the first king of Rome, reigning from 753 to 715 BC. During his short time on the throne, he set about building a proper city, complete with all the necessary infrastructure. One of his first projects was the construction of a cloaca, which was a type of sewer that the Romans used to dispose of waste. The Cloaca Maxima was Rome's first and most important sewer, and it's still there today, although it has been heavily restored over the centuries. It might not look like much nowadays, but back then, it was an engineering marvel. The Cloaca Maxima was a massive undertaking, consisting of a series of tunnels that ran throughout the city. They were designed to carry away rainwater, waste and sewage so that the city didn't turn into a giant cesspool. In fact, the Cloaca Maxima was so efficient that it's thought to have prevented many outbreaks of disease. You see, when waste is left to pile up in the streets, it creates the perfect breeding ground for rats and other vermin. These animals then carry diseases which can wipe out entire populations. For example, the Antonine Plague, which struck Rome in the 2nd century, is thought to have killed between 5 and 10 million people, or about 1/5 of the empire's population. This was devastating for Rome, and it's likely that their advanced plumbing system helped to prevent such disasters in the future. Of course, having an efficient sewage system didn't just prevent disease. It also made life much more pleasant for the average Roman. After all, nobody wants to walk through the streets dodging piles of garbage. By getting rid of waste quickly and efficiently, the Romans were able to keep their streets clean and their citizens happy. But the Romans didn't stop there. They also built public bathrooms throughout the city, complete with running water and even heating. These bathrooms were a godsend for travelers, as they provided a place to relieve oneself without having to wander into the wilderness. The Romans even had public bathrooms in their taverns and brothels, as well as in the Colosseum and other public buildings. So no matter where you went in Rome, you were never far from a bathroom. In addition to their public bathrooms, the Romans also built sewers beneath the streets. These sewers were covered with a series of arches and vaults, which allowed the city's wastewater to flow freely beneath the streets above. This meant that the Romans didn't have to worry about their streets collapsing or being flooded with sewage. In fact, the Roman sewer system was so advanced that it even featured manholes, so that workers could access the tunnels easily. As impressive as all of this sounds, the Roman sewage system was far from foolproof. It required a lot of maintenance to keep everything running smoothly. Luckily for the Romans, they had a highly developed bureaucracy that was able to handle this task with relative ease. In fact, the Roman Emperor Caligula even appointed a special engineer to oversee the city's plumbing system. This may sound trivial, but it was actually a very important job. Without someone to maintain the system, it's likely that things would have quickly fallen apart. For example, if the aqueducts that supplied the city with water broke down, it could lead to catastrophic flooding. Similarly, if the sewers became clogged, it could result in disease and death. As you can see, the Romans' plumbing system was vital to the city's survival, and thanks to their efficient bureaucracy, they were able to keep everything running smoothly for centuries. And yet, despite all this planning and efficiency, Rome's sewage system was ultimately unsustainable. As the city grew, the demand for water and the amount of waste it produced simply overwhelmed the system. By the 5th century, Rome's population had declined sharply and the city's infrastructure began to deteriorate. The once mighty aqueducts fell into disrepair, and the streets turned into a breeding ground for rats and disease. Still, despite its eventual decline, Rome's plumbing system was a remarkable achievement for its time. It's hard to overstate just how advanced the Romans' technology was. Their toilets with running water and public bathrooms with heating would have seemed like magic to people just a few centuries earlier. And their sewers were so efficient that they actually prevented disease and death. The Roman success with plumbing can be attributed to a number of factors. One was their highly developed bureaucracy, which was able to keep the system maintained and prevent disasters. Another was their advanced engineering, which allowed them to build aqueducts and sewers that could bring water into the city and carry waste away from it. Finally, the Romans were willing to invest large amounts of money into public works projects. They knew that by investing in plumbing, they were also investing in the health and happiness of their citizens. Rome's plumbing system was a key factor in the city's success. It's hard to imagine how Rome would have been able to function without it. But as the city grew, the demands on the system simply became too much. By the 5th century, Rome's plumbing system had fallen into disrepair, along with the rest of the city's infrastructure. Still, Rome's plumbing was a remarkable achievement for its time. It's hard to overstate just how advanced the Romans' technology was. Their toilets with running water and public bathrooms with heating would have seemed like magic to people just a few centuries earlier. And their sewers were so efficient that they actually prevented disease and death. But while Rome's plumbing system may have eventually fallen into disrepair, its legacy lived on. The medieval and Renaissance period saw the construction of new aqueducts and sewers throughout Europe. And today, we take for granted the fact that we can flush our toilets and turn on our taps without a second thought. Thanks to the Romans, we now live in a world where clean water and sanitation are a basic human right. Emperor Nero once hosted a party so opulent that even the porcelain gods themselves would have been envious. The year was 81 AD, and the emperor invited 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat. Among them was Pliny the Younger, who would later describe the spectacle in a letter to his friend Tacitus. All the guests were given small golden shovels to dig up the excrement from the latrines, which they then threw into the emperor's face. The fatter, the better. The crowd roared with laughter until the unfortunate host himself got covered in poop. This may seem like a dark anecdote to open a history video with, but it actually perfectly illustrates the main point of today's episode. And no, this is not clickbait. The Roman Empire did not have indoor plumbing or flushable toilets, at least not in the modern sense of the word. But what they did have was some of the most advanced sanitation infrastructure the ancient world had ever seen. And these facilities might have played a bigger role in the city's success than you might think. The great irony of human history is that we tend to remember the glorious triumphs and achievements of past civilizations, but forget about the more mundane aspects of daily life that made those societies function. You've probably heard of aqueducts, gladiators, and chariots, but how much thought have you given to the toilet? This is surprising because for many of us, the toilet is an integral part of our lives. We simply expect that when we go to a restaurant, school, or office building, there will be a toilet nearby where we can relieve ourselves. But this is a relatively recent development in human history. For thousands of years, going to the bathroom was a far less pleasant experience. So let's take a little field trip back in time and explore the history of the toilet. Let's start with the Greeks, who are often credited with inventing the first flush toilet around 500 BCE. There are several versions of the story, but they all involve a wealthy aristocrat named Mil. One day, he decided to hire a slave just to empty his bathroom. But when the man complained that this job was beneath him, Melampos supposedly grabbed a stool, pushed it over, and exclaimed, "You want something higher than this." He then pulled a lever, which flushed the contents of the toilet into a hole in the ground. In Greek, this was called a siphon, which eventually evolved into the English word siphon. And while this story might be apocryphal, there is archaeological evidence to suggest that the Greeks were using flush toilets in the Archaic period. These early toilets consisted of 2 parts, a basin and a trap. The trap was a curved pipe that held water, which prevented sewer gases from entering the house. When you wanted to flush, you tipped the basin, allowing the contents to flow through the trap and into the sewer. It was an elegant solution, but there were problems. First, the water needed to be sloped just right to ensure the contents of the bowl flowed in the correct direction. Second, you had to be careful not to tip too much water into the bowl. If you did, the trap would empty and the sewer gases would enter your house. This wasn't a big deal in the countryside, but in a densely populated city, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The Romans recognized this and improved upon the Greek design by adding a third feature, a valve to prevent the backflow of sewage. This innovation allowed the water to flow more freely and without interruption. Even if the toilet was used while the trap was still full, the valve would prevent the contents from backing up into the bowl. Unfortunately, few of these toilets have survived to the modern day. but archaeologists have been able to piece together the design based on written accounts and the few physical remains that do exist. One of the best preserved examples is the so-called Toilet of the Commander, which was discovered in Pompeii in 1939. Dating from the 2nd century CE, this toilet was found in the commander's bathroom at the Villa dei Misti. It consists of a marble basin with a leaden trap and valve, as well as a terracotta pipe that carried away the waste. But while these inventions might seem impressive, they weren't exactly high-tech. The Greeks and Romans didn't have running water, so you still had to carry water from the street into your house and then dump it into the toilet. And while the city of Rome had an extensive aqueduct system that could deliver fresh water to any household, the cost of maintaining a private bathroom would have been prohibitive for all but the wealthiest citizens. And speaking of the wealthy, there was another problem with public bathrooms. The elite generally preferred to relieve themselves in public latrines rather than in the privacy of their own homes. This meant that the city's public bathrooms had to be large enough to accommodate everyone, which was no easy task. The solution was to build multi-story latrines with multiple holes on each floor. To make things even more complicated, these toilets had to be accessible from the street without disturbing the flow of traffic. The solution was to build the latrines directly over the city's many sewers. The result was a piece of Roman infrastructure unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen before. While the Greeks built sewers to carry away waste, and the Etruscans developed public bathrooms, the Romans were the first to combine the two. They created a network of tunnels that ran throughout the city, connecting to public buildings and private homes alike. When you used a public toilet, your business would travel directly through this underground labyrinth before being dumped into the Tiber River. And if you were lucky enough to live near the river, your home's sewage would take an even more direct route. Many houses had what amounted to sewage pipes built into the foundation, allowing them to dump their waste directly into the water. But wait a second, dumping raw sewage into the river sounds absolutely terrible. How could the Romans stand the smell? Well, the answer might surprise you. For most of human history, we used urine to clean and disinfect everything from our hands to our clothes to our streets. The Romans were no different. The urine also served an important function in the aqueduct system. Since the water wasn't treated, it often contained dangerous bacteria, but the urine's acidity neutralized this, making it safe to drink. In fact, the Romans would often mix urine with wine for an extra kick, and if that doesn't sound appealing to you, don't worry. They were referring to wine that was mixed with vinegar, not pee. In the end, the Roman sanitation system functioned due to a combination of practical engineering and cultural attitudes towards cleanliness. Emperor Nero might have mocked his dinner guests, but even he understood the importance of proper sanitation. In 64 CE, Rome burned and Nero took the opportunity to redesign the city, including its sewer system. He rebuilt the aqueducts and added new public bathrooms with flush toilets throughout the city. He even went so far as to build public baths where people could wash their bodies and clothes. It might seem like a small thing, but these measures paid off in a big way. The introduction of public bathrooms undoubtedly contributed to the spread of the Roman Empire, as anyone who has ever spent a day at a Renaissance fair can attest. If you don't have a bathroom nearby, it's hard to feel comfortable. And if you can't feel comfortable, you can't enjoy yourself. Therefore, the Roman commitment to public sanitation helped make their empire more livable and enjoyable, both for their citizens and their subjects. In fact, this policy might have been a key factor in the empire's success. After all, Rome covered a lot of ground, stretching from Britain to Egypt. And this meant that the Romans had to account for a wide variety of climates. In cooler regions, the emphasis was on heating and insulation. In warmer areas, the priority was on keeping cool. Across the empire, however, sanitation was a constant. While other ancient empires came and went, the Romans stayed for centuries, in part because they made the effort to build the infrastructure necessary for a healthy society. When the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, Europe entered a long period, known as the Dark Ages, which lasted until the Middle Ages, as the old cities fell into disrepair and new settlements were built on the countryside. Sanitation became a low priority. Outdoor toilets were common, and indoor toilets didn't become widespread until the 18th century. The situation was even worse in Asia and Africa, where outdoor defecation continues to this day. Only in North America and some parts of Europe did public sanitation systems become widespread during the 19th century. Today, the world is a much cleaner place, thanks to the Roman contribution to plumbing. For example, the siphoning mechanism they invented is still used in modern toilets, And many of the public toilets you'll find in restaurants and office buildings still include a valve to prevent backflow. While we've come a long way since Nero's infamous party, the Romans might still get the last laugh. After all, you never know what's in the bowl. In this video, we've already talked about how ancient Rome had running water. They built aqueducts to bring fresh water into the city, and they solved the problem of what to do with the dirty water by building sewers to carry it away. But there was one more piece to this puzzle that we haven't discussed yet, a piece that's essential to any system that involves moving human waste. So let's talk about it. How did the Romans deal with their poop? Ancient toilums may look very different than the porcelain thrones we have today, but they accomplish the same exact purpose. Toilets are tools designed to get rid of our poop and move it away from where we live, so that we don't have to deal with it anymore. And the way that they accomplish this purpose hasn't really changed all that much since the days of the Roman Empire. The big difference between then and now isn't really the design of the toilet itself, but rather how we get it. Back in the olden times, you had to have your own personal toilet or at least access to someone else's. These days, everyone has their own personal toilet in their own home. But this wasn't always the case. As we mentioned last week, the public latrines found throughout Rome were free for everyone to use. You didn't have to pay to go to the bathroom like you sometimes have to today. And while it might be nice if we could all just head outside whenever we needed to go, this just wasn't practical in a city full of people. Public bathrooms, while certainly gross, were necessary. And these public bathrooms wouldn't have been possible without the third piece of the puzzle, the flush. Invented around 2,700 years ago in the Indus Valley civilization, the flush toilet was a massive leap forward for sanitation, without water running through pipes to push everything away. Toilets would fill up pretty quickly and would need to be emptied regularly. But when you added water to the equation, you had a self-cleaning toilet that stayed fresh and sanitary. All you had to do was pull a lever and wash your hands. And it's this use of water to remove waste that makes the Roman flush toilets so remarkable. Unlike other ancient cultures who dealt with their waste by simply throwing it out into the street, the Romans took a more hygienic approach. The Roman toilet was not just a hole in the ground. It was a piece of technology that used water to clean itself. This innovation might seem like a small one, but it had a huge impact on the way that people lived. In fact, many historians believe that the widespread adoption of the flush toilet was one of the key factors that allowed the Roman Empire to become so successful. The flush toilet is a simple concept, but it's an incredibly effective one. By using water to remove waste, the Romans were able to keep their cities clean and sanitary, which in turn helped to prevent disease and improve public health. This was especially important in a city like Rome, which was densely populated and home to people from all over the empire. The flush toilet also made it possible for people to live in close proximity to each other without having to worry about the smell of waste. This led to the development of taller buildings and more densely populated neighborhoods. This, in turn, led to the creation of more jobs and economic activity. The Romans realized early on that dealing with human waste was a big problem, but they also knew that it didn't have to be a smelly one. The Roman toilet was a huge step forward for sanitation and hygiene. By using water to remove waste, the Romans were able to keep their cities clean and prevent disease. This innovation had a major impact on the way that people lived and helped to make Rome one of the most successful cities in the ancient world. So, the next time you flush your toilet, take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity of the Romans who invented this simple yet effective piece of technology. I know it's kind of hard to imagine now, but there was actually a time before toilets when people had to find other ways to deal with their waste. Things were pretty gross back then. And it wasn't until the Romans came along that things started to change. The Roman Empire was the first to really embrace the idea of sanitation and hygiene. They built aqueducts to bring fresh water into their cities, and they built sewers to carry away the waste. But what about in between? What happened to the waste once it left the house, but before it hit the sewer? That's where the toilet came in. The Roman toilet was a fixture found in wealthy homes, taverns, and public buildings. It was basically a bowl attached to a pipe that ran to the sewer. When you flushed the toilet, a valve opened and the waste was washed away. The toilet bowl itself was typically made of ceramic, but the pipes were usually made of lead. Lead pipes were common in Roman plumbing because lead is a very dense material that can withstand high pressure. However, this also meant that the waste was often contaminated with lead, which is highly toxic. This was obviously not ideal, but it was the best solution the Romans had at the time. One of the great things about the Roman toilet is that it was a very simple design. It didn't require any electricity or running water to operate. All you needed was a strong stomach and a willingness to deal with the occasional splashback. The downside of this, of course, is that the toilet could get pretty smelly. Even though the waste was being carried away, it still had to sit in the bowl for a while. This meant that the toilet could quickly become a breeding ground for bacteria and unpleasant odors. To combat this, the Romans often put a small amount of urine in the toilet bowl. Urine was a common cleaning agent in those days, and it was thought to help prevent disease. Despite their best efforts, however, the Romans were never really able to get rid of the smell completely. In fact, the toilets were often so smelly that people would have to hold their breath when they used them. This probably wasn't the best idea, since holding your breath while using the toilet is never a good sign. But hey, the Romans weren't known for their great fashion sense anyway. If you've ever visited Rome, you may have seen the famous Piazza Navona. It's a beautiful square with fountains and statues from the Baroque period. But did you know that it used to be home to a much less pleasant sight? The Piazza Navona was built on top of the site of one of ancient Rome's largest and busiest public latrines. It's hard to imagine now, but the Romans used to relieve themselves right in the middle of what is now one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. The latrines were located beneath a large colonnaded complex that housed shops, offices, and apartments. They were used by thousands of people every day and were cleaned out regularly. The waste was then used for cleaning and other purposes. The discovery of the latrines was made in the early 1900s during excavations in the Piazza. Archaeologists were surprised to find such a large and well-used facility in the heart of the city. The latrines were eventually filled in and covered over, but the memory of their former use still remains. Today, visitors to the piazza can pick up signs that warn them not to walk in the exact spot where the Romans used to poop. While it may be shocking to think that the Romans relieved themselves where they worked and shopped, it was actually pretty common practice in those days. Public latrines were a necessary part of life in ancient cities, and the people of Rome weren't shy about using them. In fact, they often decorated them with frescoes and sculptures to make them more pleasant to use. The Romans were masters of engineering, and they knew that the key to a successful city was good sanitation. The aqueducts brought fresh water into the city and the sewers carried away the waste. In between, the toilets kept the streets clean and prevented disease. The Romans might have been gross in some ways, but they were also incredibly advanced. They understood the importance of hygiene, and they developed some pretty sophisticated technology to deal with human waste. So next time you flush your toilet, remember the Romans and give them a little thanks for giving us the gift of indoor plumbing. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and drop a like if you haven't already, and make a comment on which topic you'd like to see next.